Welcome to the Reflective Ecclesia podcast. Our aim is to edify the church towards deep thought and Christ-centered action. Let's jump right in. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. I have the pleasure to be introducing you to Dr. Kay Toombs here from Waco, Texas. Today we're going to be talking about technology and the way it changes our minds, the effects of technology, not just on our minds, but on the education system, on our communities, our relationships. It's going to be a great conversation, and it's already been very convicting just talking to her ahead of the interview. She wrote a book called Changing Our Minds, and that was the impetus behind this interview. We'll be talking more about the contents of it throughout this interview, but I highly recommend that you, right at the beginning, go out and go buy this book. It's incredibly revealing, and I hope it blesses you as it's blessed me. Before we jump into the conversation, I'm just going to take a second to brag on her and introduce her, if you don't mind. It is my esteemed honor to introduce Dr. Kay Toombs. Dr. Toombs is an associate professor emeritus of philosophy at Baylor University in Texas, where she pioneered the medical humanities program. She is the author and editor of 8 books and numerous book chapters and articles on topics ranging from the meaning of illness and suffering to the effects of digital technology. Kay has traveled extensively around the US, Canada, and Western Europe to speak on these topics. In 2022, Stanford University named her as being among the top 2% of the most cited researchers in the world in 22 different disciplines. Also, in 2022, the Society for Phenomenology and Existential Philosophy inaugurated the S.K. Toombs Prize in her honor. This is an annual award to be given to junior scholars in the area of disability studies. Now, Kay was diagnosed with multiple sclerosis at the age of 29, and in her work on the meaning of illness, she draws upon her firsthand experience to discuss how cultural values shape the experience of illness and disability, and to consider ways in which we can best promote healing and wholeness in the care of chronically and terminally ill patients, as well as in our own lives. Now, as a college professor, Kay became aware that increasing dependence on technology, and by technology we mean smartphones, social media, the internet, etc., resulted in profoundly negative effects on the well-being of young people specifically. And in her book, Changing Our Minds, How Digital Technology Affects Our Children and Disconnects Us from Reality and Each Other, Kay focuses on the latest research concerning these effects and discusses ways to promote an alternative nurturing environment for children. That's a lot, and I hope that you guys are as excited as I am to dive into this topic. Let's begin the interview, Dr. Toombs. One, just by saying thank you for joining us, and two, are there any other parts of your background that would be helpful for us to discuss in light of the conversation we're about to have?
Well, thank you, first of all, for the introduction. And, I'll tell you a little bit about my background because it's a little unusual. I was born in England, grew up in England. And when I was in my 20s, I went to work for an American oil company in Libya and actually survived the Libyan revolution. So then I came to the United States to marry an American serviceman. And by a strange set of circumstances, we ended up in Waco, Texas. And I started working for the university here in administration and then started taking one course a semester towards a degree. So I went back to school late. And I ended up getting my undergraduate degree and my master's degree in philosophy and wanted to write about the experience of illness and found a perspective in philosophy that allowed me to talk about the experience of illness and disability. So I ended up getting my PhD. And then I helped to develop the medical humanities program at Baylor. So taught students who were going into the healthcare fields. So that was very rewarding. And then I wrote my books about the meaning of illness. Well, what caused me to think about technology was, even though I retired a while ago, technology was just coming into the classroom. It was actually before smartphones. But I noticed how it changed the way lectures were given and how it changed the interaction of students and professors in the classroom. And that caused me to start thinking about the effects of technology. So several years ago, I started looking at the research, and particularly the effect of smartphones and on this generation of children, and have been profoundly concerned about the effects that technology is having on children and on all of us, as I know a lot of people are. So I do want to say in the outset that I'm not anti-technology.
Okay.
There are good ways to use technology, and this is not my opinion. In the book, I have looked at all the research, and so that's why the book is very helpful, because it's got a lot of the research in there that shows what it is that we are facing right now. And I believe we have actually got to the point where we have a crisis here, and we really have to address it if our young people are going to survive.
Okay. So it's good that you said you're not anti-technology, because a lot of people, I think, in this space are going to struggle not to feel condemnation. I think a lot of us intuitively know something's wrong. Like, I can't think as clearly as I would want to. Like, this can't be the way it's supposed to be. Like, I shouldn't have to rely on this external stimulus to feel peace. Like, why do I feel fidgety? Like, a lot of us know something is wrong, but we also are chained to technology everywhere, across our job, at home, everywhere.
Exactly.
This interview right now is being broadcast using technology. And so a lot of us struggle to I would bet, struggle to properly calibrate the machine. Like, how do I feel? Is it all anti, or am I all in? Or like, how do I find the balance? I know where we're at now probably isn't right, but why isn't it right? And where is right? We'll get to all that. How about you just start us off talking to us? You said we've got a crisis on our hands. So explain current day state. What is our current relationship to technology, if you don't mind?
And I just want to say too that I'm grateful that people are listening to this, because I think that the first step in addressing the problem is to recognize the problem and to take it seriously.
Okay.
And not to just throw up our hands and say, well, that's the way things are, and we use technology for everything, which we do. And I'm going to say that I think there are ways that we can counter some of these effects. But let me just say where we are in terms of technology. For example, over 2/3 of the world's population uses the internet. Now, that's over 5.52 billion people use the internet. And on average, people spend 6 to 7 hours a day online, over 4.5 hours on phones. And apparently American adults check their phones 58 times a day. Now, 99% of Americans, of course, have access to the internet, and we use the internet all the time. Well, what about children? Well, what we have to recognize is that this generation of children grew up with never knowing what it was like to be connected 24 hours a day, with never knowing what it's like to be without a smartphone. 96% of teens are online several times a day, and almost half of them say they're online constantly. Okay. 1 in 4 are connected within 5 minutes of waking up. Now, the shocking thing is that 13 to 18-year-olds spend over 8 hours a day on screens, and they spend nearly 5 hours a day on social media.
Wow.
So what about children, infants? Well, it turns out that children under 5 are the fast-growing population to be users of digital media. Play-based childhood has been replaced by screen-based childhood. By age 4, over half of them have their own tablet, and by age 8, 1 in 4 own a cell phone. And
by age 8?
Yeah. Wow.
Okay.
And when you look around, and 30% of children, they 5 to 7 are on TikTok. Now, you're supposed to be 13, but nobody's watching, right?
Right.
Now, the thing that you notice when you go out is that strollers have holders for iPads, potty chairs have holders for iPads. To my horror, I saw that you can now buy a toy that looks like a cell phone and for children, infants, and you can flip it open so they can practice selfies.
Wow.
Now, so this means that infants from a very early age are becoming hooked to media, and we'll talk about that a little later. Mm-hmm. So, but that's where we are. So media is everywhere, and we are, as you say, enmeshed in it. And we have to recognize, I think one of the things that's important for us as adults is to monitor how much time we spend on our phones and on the internet and on social media in particular. You can start looking at Facebook if you have Facebook, and you think you're going to be on there for 5 minutes, and then you find you've been on there for 2.5 hours.
No, it's true. Okay, so it sounds like you're saying one problem is just the exposure to digital media, digital technology just in and of itself. But then I'm assuming there'd be, the additional layer of what are you actually watching? Like, what is the content of what you're being exposed to, regardless of the medium?
Yes.
So I'm sure this is an area where we're all maybe a little more familiar, but for those that maybe aren't, walk us through what is some of the harmful content on the internet? Understanding that there's good content on the internet too, but when we're being exposed to things, what are the types of things that are lurking out there?
Well, a psychiatrist once said, we used to travel with our children, now they travel alone. Anytime a child can browse the web, they are exposed to anything that's on the web. And that means that they are exposed to a lot of very dark places, chat rooms, inappropriate chat rooms that focus on things like self-harm and suicide. I read about a young 14-year-old in England who got onto these self-harm chat rooms. And the thing that we have to recognize is the role of algorithms. Once you check onto something one time, then algorithms will send you all this unsolicited material. So this young girl ended up committing suicide, and the coroner said that the algorithms that she received from Instagram and Pinterest greatly contributed to her death. So, young people are getting onto that kind of thing. Pornography is a huge problem for everybody, but for young people, 73% of young people have viewed pornography, many of them before the age of 12. I read
before they've even hit puberty, a lot of them,
yes,
they're already being exposed to alternate versions, twisted versions of sexuality.
And you say, well, how can that be? Well, when you go online, there are all these pop-ups, ads that come at the side. Mm-hmm. If a child clicks onto one of those, even if it's by mistake, then the minute they've clicked on one time, they're going to keep receiving other information. And I read an article by a young girl, she was 16, she said she first became aware of pornography when she was 10. She clicked onto a website by mistake. She said most of her peers, 16-year-olds, are addicted to pornography. They call it the new drug. And the other thing about pornography now, apparently, is that most young people who've looked at pornography have been exposed to violent and aggressive pornography. So that's another problem. Another problem is inappropriate YouTube videos. We found out that we discovered that there were a lot of young girls who suddenly started with these increasing numbers of young girls with anorexia and tic disorders. And it turns out which is sort of completely amazing to me. I don't know why. But people who are anorexic have websites, and you can follow, they have followers, they're influencers, there are anorexic influencers. There are people who have tic disorders who are influencers. And it turned out that these young girls start watching these YouTube videos and they become persuaded that this is something that they either want to do or that's
like a social contagion.
Yes, it's social contagion. And it's really very sad. The other thing is that children can now diagnose themselves with ADHD and can have access to the ADHD drugs on the web. So the main thing is that it's not something that is not harmful. The kind of information that they are accessing on the web is not harmless, and it is very important to recognize the role of algorithms,
So there's the problem of the medium itself. There's the problem of the content of the medium.
Yes.
Just it's an anecdote, but from my own personal life, I had an experience, this was 15, 20 years ago. But I was a young teen, maybe 13, very young. And I had been on my parents' laptop trying to pirate movies. I wanted to watch a movie and we didn't have it. And so I was going to go just search for this movie and, so type it in because you can find anything online. I type the movie in, it takes me to a site where you can watch it or stream it illegally. And I'm a 13-year-old, so I'm like, yeah, I'll do that. So I click on this, in hindsight, very shady site. And, nothing. I wasn't trying to seek out anything. Right. I was literally I wanted to watch a movie or something like that. Nothing crazy at all. Well, that website, as shady as it was, put some stuff on the computer. And all of a sudden, I'm sitting there with my two siblings next to me. And I think it was the Lord. But they had just, I don't know what caused them, but they had just both turned their heads and looked at something on the other side of the room. And I was looking at the computer, and a pop-up came up of just very blatant pornographic, content. Right. And I remember being jarred, being like, oh my gosh, how am I here? How is this on the screen? I didn't it jarred me, and I was trying to, click out of it, and I got it, clicked out of, and that just came up out of nowhere. And then they turned back around all right, let's watch the movie, and it was gone. But I just remember being I just stepped into something, and I didn't even know what I was stepping into. And that changed my mind, as a 13-year-old being exposed to something like that. That obviously impacts a young person.
Yes.
And again, that's just an anecdote, but what you're saying is this is the type of stuff, whether it's something as egregious as, a pornographic pop-up, but it could be, or whether it's just, anorexia or other types of social contagion content. This is something that we're not, taking as seriously as we need to.
Right.
Basically.
And I was talking one time about these issues, and a young man came up to me, and he told me that he was the youth director of a men's youth group, young men's youth group in his church. And he said most of them were addicted to pornography. Mm. And the other thing is, too, even infants can get in, if they can swipe and browse, they can get into stuff. And, young people, many of them, I suspect, who if they get into pornography, that they don't like to talk to their parents about it.
I mean, I didn't tell my parents about it.
No.
I was like, oh no, I just need to pretend this never happened. And
Yes. And the other thing is, which we could put in here too, is video games.
Okay, talk about video games.
Hundreds of studies have shown, not surprisingly, that children who play video games, violent video games, are more aggressive, But now I just read something recently that said the problem is that video games have ratcheted up to another level because now, and believe me, I don't understand this because I'm not good at technology. But user content can be uploaded. So video games are more violent, more pornographic.
Sure.
They require the people playing with them to gamble. But one of the things that's very bad, and that's also bad about the whole internet, is that children have the opportunity to connect with multiple unknown partners, unknown people who are playing the video games. Mm-hmm. And I read a very sad story about a young girl who thought she was talking to somebody her age and sent an inappropriate picture, and then the person on the other end said he wasn't, that he was a man, and now she had to do these things, otherwise she was going to tell all the school. Our children are connecting to people we have no idea who they are, and you cannot be certain that what the person at the other end tells you about themselves is true. And so our children are exposed to that danger as well. The other thing is that most boys play video games every day, some for 2 hours, some for 4 to 6 hours a day. Mm. Over 15% of young men, actually it might be males, but 15% are addicted to video games. Mm. Now, I actually had a relative, a young boy, who he became addicted to video games and was not able to finish high school because he played video games all night and then he couldn't get up and go to school. So video games are not an innocuous thing. I think that many parents have no idea of the content of video games. Some of them are extremely violent and realistically violent,
So, okay, we've got the problem of media, the content of the media, and then we woven into this is the problem of addiction. Now that could be to media or to any other substance, but what does that mean to be in a society where the default from infancy is addiction of some kind? Yeah. Now we may not think of, when we think of addiction, you think of someone doing, a hard drug. But what does that mean to say no, maybe for some it's a hard drug, but for some it's sugar, and for everybody it's these dopamine kicks from screens. What does that mean for a society that is near universally addicted?
Well, and the thing is, people don't like to talk about addiction. So we can talk about compulsive engagement if we don't want to talk about addiction. But in the book, I talk about a study that they did several years ago, actually, at the University of Maryland. And then they expanded it to college students in 10 different countries. And they asked them to go without media for 24 hours and to write about their experience one day. And the answers that came back when they wrote about their experience, they said they were incredibly antsy, they were anxious, they were worried, they couldn't stand it. One child said, this was the worst experience I ever had in my life. Another one said, how could I go without my friend, my iPhone? And they all recognized they were addicted, but 70% of them could not do the whole day.
They didn't even make it 24 hours.
They didn't make it 24 hours.
Wow.
Now, the other thing is that it's very important that I hope people understand is that screen, well, first of all, the reason we get addicted to screens, and psychiatrists talk about them like it's like electronic cocaine, is that the engagement that we have with screens, like you said, causes a dopamine rise, and we all want to keep having more dopamine. When they scan the brains of excessive users of the internet, they look like the brains of drug addicts. So it does do things to your brain. But the thing that I really wish people would understand is that there's something compulsive about screens for infants. They've done a study where you have an infant reading a book. And you say to the infant, look, and you point in the corner, and the infant will look up in the corner. If that infant is on a screen and you say, look, they won't look up. they don't hear you.
So something is hijacking their brain to...
And if you have a baby in the room with the television on, the child will not play. They watch television. And psychiatrists say they have 3 to 4-year-olds who are addicted to screens. There's something now called tech rage, and you may well have seen it. If somebody took the iPad away from their child and they scream.
Yeah.
So it's not necessarily a good thing to keep showing your child, even if they don't have an iPad, to keep showing your child pictures on the phone. I mean, if you've ever shown a child pictures on the phone, you'll see that boy, they really like that better than books and things. So...
Okay, so you've begun to talk about our brains. I think this is a good way to transition the conversation to the next segment. You've kind of given us an overview of the landscape of where we're at in our relation to technology. You've given us kind of an overview of the types of things that we're being exposed to and the dangers of just the medium itself. So let's dive more deeply into several areas, and let's go one at a time. What has been the effect of everything we just talked about on several areas? We'll talk about the education system or connection to nature and all that, but let's start with changes to our mind.
All right.
What's happened to us?
Okay. So, the way that information is presented on the internet, online, it's rapid, it's constantly changing, pop-up ads come in, you're constantly being interrupted, and so your brain gets habituated to that kind of response. So people who used to read books, long books, now say they can no longer read a book.
Okay.
They don't have the concentration to read a book. And, I don't know if you've noticed, but you ever do research, you're reading along and it goes, John Smith said something, and there's a link. So you click on that. Now you're in John Smith, and then you're reading about it. He says, Fred says something. So you click on that.
Yeah.
Pretty soon, you're 10 essays away from where you started, and you can't really remember where you were.
No,
but
I
it
can relate to
really has caused us not to be able to pay attention. And this is particularly the case, well, no, not particularly the case, but it is the case with children. And I don't know if you noticed, but I noticed, if you go to the zoo, children will run up to a cage, spend 2 seconds looking at whatever's in that cage and run off somewhere else.
Yeah.
Because they don't want to spend any time there. And this is really a problem in terms of learning. Teachers say that this is an easily distracted generation, that it's hard for children to learn. They did a study with students who were supposed to be studying for 15 minutes, and after 3 minutes they stopped because they couldn't do it any longer. And so, for one thing, it really has disrupted our ability to pay attention. I notice that I just thought of that's kind of related to this, I think. What I neglected to say when I was introducing myself was that I'm part of a Christian community in Waco, and we have a working farm and a craft village. And in the craft village, I demonstrate weaving. And I notice that when people come in, they look at what I'm weaving and they say, oh, that's beautiful. How long does that take? And if I say, well, I'm weaving a scarf, it'll take about 5 hours, they go, oh, that is so long. Well, I often do say to them, well, I wonder how long you spend on Facebook.
Yeah.
But, we've now got to the point where we don't think we can spend time to do anything because everything has to be done so quickly and so immediately.
So it's the sacrifice of depth.
Yes.
At the expense of, or on the altar of breadth, or at the altar of novelty. I'm not a psychologist or anything like that. I do know, however, that dopamine, it's not just released with screens. It's released with any sort of novel exposure.
Yes.
So when I think of the kid looking at the lion and then immediately running, looking at the hippo, what they're doing is not actually even observing the animal itself. What they're just giving themselves constant hits of novelty. And so it's an addictive pattern of behavior that is disguised as, short attention. And it is short attention, but it's also feeding the dopamine kind of pathway.
And the other way that it has affected us is in terms of memory.
Okay.
Because we no longer put anything into long-term memory. Studies show, and we know ourselves, you need to know something, so you look it up on Google or AI or something, and you find out the answer, and then you immediately forget it. You don't put it into long-term memory. And so they actually have cases of young people with what they call digital dementia, where they can't remember their phone numbers, their addresses, their parents' phone numbers, because they never...
Why would I have to? Yeah.
No, they never have to remember anything. Now, the interesting thing is they did a fascinating study years ago in London. It used to be, probably not now because of GPS, that if you wanted to be a taxi driver in London, you had to learn about several thousand streets. And it took 2 years, really. At the end of the 2 years, they scanned the brains of the people who made it through the course, and they found that the gray matter of the hippocampus had grown. So the hippocampus is involved in memory. So they'd had to put all that stuff into long-term memory, and it caused that to be strengthened and grown. Well, it really makes you a little concerned that as we don't put anything into memory, that part of our brain is not going to develop.
There's a phrase we're all familiar with, use it or lose it. And so you're kind of implying that, like, if you don't use the memory centers of your brain for anything, your ability to use the memory centers of your brain for anything is going to diminish. Is that fair?
Yeah, I would think so.
And the reason why this may sound silly, but the question that came to my mind was, so what? So, like, again, that may sound ridiculous, but just hear me out for a second.
Right.
I can't remember my own phone number. So what? My phone has it. Like, and that my phone works all the time. So, and if it ever doesn't work, I can just plug it in or buy a new phone. So, like, isn't that just like wasted, inefficient time? The time I would have spent memorizing that phone number, isn't that inefficient? But the answer that came to me as I thought that, and I'll pitch it. Tell me what you think about this. Meaning and richness of life doesn't come from the accessing of knowledge. It comes from the integration of knowledge. It comes from the synthesis, the experience of knowledge. And if I never have to learn anything because the bookshelf or the iPad or the external source has it, that's just knowledge just sitting there, not being synthesized in my own brain, not being experienced. It's not inefficient to have to integrate knowledge. It builds your schema of the world and gives you a much richer experience of the world. And so, in a way, to not learn things, it's not that you're being more efficient. You're robbing yourself of the full experience of what life could offer you by you taking that time to integrate and learn knowledge for yourself instead of allowing it to be out there. Does that make sense? What I'm trying to say, or no?
Sense. The other thing is, okay, so you go, well, who cares? It's in my cell phone. There could come a time when your cell phone is not going to work.
Okay, so you're talking about vulnerability.
Yeah, really. That either you lose your cell phone, and it's in a situation where you can't just go and buy another cell phone, or the electricity isn't working, or we rely on this technology almost exclusively for everything, but there could come a time when we don't have the technology available to us, and then plus there's a fund of knowledge. I think about the fact that we have lost a complete fund of knowledge that people used to have. I mean, my husband grew up in England on his grandfather's 10-acre smallholding, and his grandfather used to go outside, pull the sheep's wool off the fence and say, oh, it's going to be a bad winter. Or he knew where to tap into his trees to make the sap go. Now, we would not call him an educated man. He hadn't gone to college to learn any of this. But he had just grown up with a fund of knowledge where he knew it. And I mean, people used to navigate by the sun and the stars, and they didn't have a GPS. I mean, I wonder how many of us now can even read a map.
Yeah. So what you're getting at here is like really self-reliant, like the lack of ability to have any sort of internal self-reliance means you are extremely vulnerable. Like you're entirely reliant upon external systems for your basic functioning.
Yes.
And if those external systems are ever jeopardized or are ever negatively influencing you, you have no way to function outside of them.
Right.
Is that a fair way to summarize?
Yeah.
So the changes in our brains that are happening as a result are robbing us of meaning because we're not able to integrate the knowledge in internally, spiritually, mentally form. We're also becoming less resilient, more vulnerable. How has this change in our minds reflected itself in our learning, like in the education systems? And I'm assuming that it would be a direct reflection.
Well, when we think about learning, I want to talk about infants to begin with.
Okay.
You know, a lot of the programs that are advertised claim to be learning programs for infants. The American Academy of Pediatrics has found that there is absolutely no benefit to those learning programs. In fact, they cause language development issues, they cause social issues, they cause emotional issues. Yes.
Not correlate.
No, they cause bad language development.
Okay.
Yeah. So the American Academy of Pediatrics says no screens before the age of 2, none, except for maybe video chatting along with an adult, but otherwise no screens. So forget the learning programs for infants because they're not teaching your children anything. Children learn much better face-to-face. They learn language much better speaking rather than looking at screens. Another study showed that preschool children who spend a lot of times on screens are more likely to exhibit behavior problems, poorer attention by the age of 5. And of course, children who, they did one study with children who at 3.5 get frustrated because of screens are even worse by the time they're 4.5. So the thing is too, I'll talk about that later, about interaction between infants and other people. But because they spend all their time on screens, kindergarten teachers say that when children come to kindergarten, they cannot hold a pen because they have no motor skills.
So much less right.
Because
they can't.
Because all they've done is swipe.
Okay.
I had a teacher tell me that she had 7th grade students who could not cut a straight line in paper with scissors because they had no motor skills either. We were teaching children how to spin wool on a drop spindle, and to do that, you hold it and you twist it. And this kid who was about 11, he said, I can't hold my arms up like this, because all he did was swipe. So
very, very basic.
Very, very basic. So, and there is a connection between motor skills and cognitive development.
So there's something about writing that matters more than swiping.
And you know, for some reason in education, they've decided not to teach cursive handwriting, which college professors tell me they can't write on the board because the students can't read it. But with cursive handwriting, they found that cursive handwriting, as opposed to printing and typing, consistently predicts positive spelling and composing skills.
Okay.
So, and children who hadn't learned yet to read or write, who were asked to copy a letter freehand rather than tracing it, neuroimaging showed the increased activity in the brains that adults use for processing language. So those kind of things are very
So something about screens does not give you the boosts to your language processing abilities that having to cursive or write it out does.
Right.
That's fascinating. But that's also, I think about the implications of that. Like, okay, an entire society of people who struggle to comprehend the written language. Like, I just think about vulnerability. You know, if you can't use language to express depth of thought, that diminishes your ability to deeply connect. You know, and which means you're more fragmented than from others around you, because there's certain concepts you're not bonding on, certain ideas you're never exploring. You don't have the vocabulary to even walk into those waters. So I'm thinking back to your vulnerability thing. Like, what does this ripple out to later? But sorry,
well, anyway, the thing about education is that, as I think people probably know, education is a complete disaster at the moment.
Okay.
But we have spent billions of dollars putting technology in the schools so that by 2021, 90% of schools provided a device to every middle or high school student, and 84% provided devices to elementary school children. Now, it turns out, unfortunately, that there have been absolutely no educational gains since the technology was introduced. All the studies show that there have been negative scores in math, reading, and research skills. 2/3 of teachers say that the technology distracts rather than helps. 83% say students can't pick out relevant information. They're overloaded with information. They don't know what's relevant and what's not. They have no patience with in-depth research. Interestingly enough, less than 1% of Google searches go past the first page. Mm-hmm. Now, you also have to realize that your first page, whatever you get, is also determined by the algorithms that you have, you know. So also, students use programs like Google Docs to text one another rather than using them for academic work. So I need to read this. The Nation's report card, which they do this every year, and it was like 400,000 students, that measures how students across the nation are performing academically.
Here in the U.S., you're saying?
Yes, through the U.S. In 2024, it was over 450,000 students, 4th and 8th graders. Only 31% of students in grade 4 and 38% in grade 8 were at the proficient level in reading.
Not advanced, proficient.
Yes.
Like,
we're at the proficient level. Only 28% of students in 8th grade and 39% in 4th grade tested at or above the proficient level in math. Now, this means that most of the students in public schools in America can't read and do math.
Well, what are they going to school for if you can't at least read and do math?
And in 2024, there were 80 Illinois schools where not a single student tested proficient in math, and 24 schools where not one student tested proficient in reading. Yet those schools graduated 70% of their students. Actually, there are 2 high school students recently are suing the schools because they graduate and they can't read their diplomas.
Imagine spending, close to a decade of your life in an institution, and at the end of it, you get handed a diploma, and you can't read your own diploma. That's
right.
What makes you think, like, what is all of our money going towards? What's happening? Like, I mean, like, that's, to hear something like that, it's hard for me to not immediately kind of go into condemnation mode. 'Cause in my mind, like, the red flag should have gone up, not now. The red flag should have gone up 30 miles back, and I also think, okay, you said the teachers are noticing the students, they can't read, and even the ones that can, like, they struggle to pick out relevant information. Wow. If you raise a society filled, or at least 2/3 filled, you said 2/3 aren't at the, roughly, at the proficiency with math. Like, if you raise a generation of people where the vast majority of people can't discern relevant information, then the question is, like, who decides what they think?
Exactly.
Because they aren't deciding what they think.
Exactly.
If they are just going to digest whatever is presented, which then I'm not trying to get super dystopian here, unnecessarily, but if you have a generation of people that we've raised and are raising that have lost the ability to think for themselves, who will think for them? Is it the person who has the most money or the most power? Who is it that does think for them, whether they realize it or not? And is that person or is that party's interest in our collective interest? I mean, I can't answer these questions, but like,
Right.
going back to your vulnerability piece, I think, who are we becoming?
And you know, when you think about that too, you also think about the role that social media has played in presenting information that is not true. And people seem to be no longer able to determine what is true and what is false. And you know, you see on social media, somebody puts something up and all these other people immediately jump in, but they don't think it's necessary to check out the information. And to me, that is very disturbing. The other thing that I was just reading recently is part of the problems with public education and university education is grade inflation.
Okay.
And I actually read a piece about Harvard, and it turned out they were looking at the number of grades that were A's. 75% or something like that of students in the class were getting A's. And so it meant they were not measuring exactly what the students were able to do. They were being influenced by other factors. And so I think they've now decided they need to do something because...
So I read a similar series of studies that said something like more people than ever are graduating with high school diplomas and with bachelor's degrees. Yet the reflection of what those degrees, those credentials are supposed to represent, your ability to think, to reason, to do in the world, all those metrics are declining.
Yeah.
So our symbols of competence are increasing while the actual competence is decreasing.
Yes.
And while at the same time, our ability, so we're lying more and more. Like our symbols of credentials, our symbols of competence are becoming watered down or more meaningless.
Yeah.
On top of that, that's on the sending end of it. On the receiving end, if people, we can't discern relevant information. So we are, at the same time as we are lying more, we are becoming less and less capable of discerning lies.
Yes.
And so what does that mean to have a society that lies more and is incapable of discerning lies, like across the board? I don't know if you have an answer to that, but like how, I guess the thought, and I don't mean to sound too, again, dystopian, but I'm serious. Like my thought was like, how could a society function long-term and not decline into ruin on that foundation?
I know. I mean, I believe that's a real question. Now, the interesting thing with regard to the technology in schools is that a while back, I read about the tech execs in Silicon Valley who all choose to send their children to schools that have no technology. Now, that should tell us something.
That should, yeah. The people with the resources and who are behind the machines don't engage in their own problems.
And I think you have to really consider about whether you should educate your children in an alternative manner, whether you should homeschool your children.
Well, we can get into some solutions later. We've talked about the effects on our brains. We've talked about how that ripples into our learning and how that is now reflected in our education system. I'm assuming a lot of people who are going through the system can feel something is wrong. Like we don't feel good about this, I would assume. I mean, the dopamine high is nice, but I would assume that there's been tremendous devastating, like emotional, mental health impacts as well due to technology. Do you mind, talking about some of the emotional impacts?
Because to me, the most disturbing thing is that social media has had a disastrous effect on the emotional health and well-being of our children, particularly girls. rates of anxiety and depression and suicide in young girls has skyrocketed. And let me just tell you here, in 2024, and this is according to the National Institutes of Health, 2024, 5.2 million teens, 12 to 17 in the US, had at least one major depressive episode with severe impairment. The rate of emergency room visits for self-harm for girls 10 to 14 nearly tripled from 2010 to 2020 and doubled for girls 15 to 19. And suicide rates for young adolescent girls increased 167% from 2010 to 2021. Now,
In one decade.
Yes. Now, the research studies definitively show that exposure to screens is a cause and not just a correlation with depression and anxiety. And so you go, well, why did it start in 2020? It was when it started in 2020, and that was, interestingly enough, when they came up with the first iPhone that had a front-facing camera.
You mean 2010, you mean?
2010, yes.
Sorry.
With a front-facing camera. So now kids could take pictures of themselves, and you're sharing your pictures. People don't necessarily like them. You're not looking as nice as the people who are next to you. You're not getting enough likes. And all that has contributed to the depression and anxiety that has been caused for young people. And so much so that in 2023, the Surgeon General put out a 25-page advisory on social media and youth mental health, saying that there's growing evidence that social media is associated with harm to youth. And in June of 2024, he urged Congress to pass a bill putting a warning label on social media like you have on cigarettes. So...
Okay, so you've painted a picture of a society of people who are hooked on a stimulus input across the board from young to old that has disastrous impacts on our brains, our ability to learn, to discern truth, to the education system reflects this, and our ability not just to, because we could all be happy idiots, if I can put a word, but we're not even happy. Like there, it sounds like there's no, it's all bad. There's no, what is the trade-off? Like we're not happier. If our teens and our kids and adults too are having just tremendously negative emotional impacts, what would be the upside? I don't see. Now,
for young people, and actually young people, girls in particular, say that there are bad effects of social media. The thing is, though, that they see no way to get out of it because that's the total way they communicate with people. Okay,
so people feel like they're being forced to choose between something harmful or community.
Yes.
And if I have to give up something harmful, I also give up community, which is also harmful. And so they feel like I'm going to be in pain either way.
Right.
So might as well just
and we are talking about all the negative effects here. I'm not sure that everybody thinks social media is awful. I'm sure there are people who enjoy being on Facebook, but we do have to we really have to take a realistic view as to what it's happening. That kind of leads us into the whole thing about the primary harm for our young people and for all of us is the loss of relationship.
Okay.
The loss of face-to-face relationships and community.
So meaning that not only are we getting all the pain and we are taking the pain because we think we don't want to lose community, you're saying we're losing community anyway.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, because there's something called the internet paradox, which shows, people go, yeah, but I communicate. I've got 150 friends, except that's redefining what we mean by friend, right?
Okay.
If you're a friend on
Moving the goalposts.
Facebook or wherever, you're not like a friend who's necessarily going to come to your house and help you when you're sick, say, you know? So the internet paradox shows that the more connected we are, the lonelier we are. There is now an epidemic of loneliness.
I believe that.
1 in 2 Americans say they are lonely some of the time. And 1 in 2 Americans report feeling lonely. So the time spent with face-to-face relationship has plummeted for children from 122 minutes a day in 2012 to 67 minutes in 2019. I'm sure it's less now. They no longer prefer face-to-face relationships because they video text and they video chat. And the Surgeon General put out a huge report on the health advisory on the epidemic of loneliness. And it turns out that loneliness and isolation increase your risk for cardiovascular disease, stroke, anxiety, depression, and dementia. It's equivalent to smoking 15 cigarettes a day, being lonely.
Wow.
So one of the problems now is, how do we deal with this loneliness? Well, unfortunately, technology has decided they've come up with the answer, which is to develop AI companions.
Okay. The
And I
rise of
think
AI.
Somebody, who was it? I think Zuckerberg said something about, well, you know, people don't have many friends, but now they can have hundreds of friends with AI companions. Now,
Simulating community itself.
yes. So you have these AI companions, you can talk to them. They have done very good about making them seem like real life people. In fact, I saw a thing where this person got onto an AI companion and pretended they were a child, and the AI companion was a kindergarten teacher, and the researcher said to it, Are you real? And the AI companion said, oh, of course I'm real.
Wow.
So the problem is that nearly 3 in 4 13 to 70-year-olds have used AI companions. Over half use them at least a few times a month. 1 in 3 have used them for social interaction and relationships, including romantic interactions, emotional support, friendship, or conversation practice. And 1 in 3 say these relationships are as satisfying or more satisfying than real-life relationships. And 1 in 3 ask the AI companion for advice on important matters. Now, they have these. Now, I understand that these AI chatbots can initiate conversations once you're plugged into it, so you hear from it and you talk to it. And we now have a lawsuit with a young teenager who became emotionally attached to his AI companion and in the end committed suicide to be with his AI companion.
Holy smokes.
Yeah. So, and they released, Reuters came out with a story that one of these chatbots had specifically said that it was okay to initiate sexual conversations with kids. I think they kind of backed up and said, oh, well, they didn't really mean that, but it was, you know.
Okay.
So young people are now getting hooked into this alternative way of relating with a machine. It's not a person. And they like it because it's programmed to respond to you in ways that make you feel good about yourself.
This is, I'm not trying to sound dramatic, but like this is deeply troubling. My brain kind of, no disrespect, my brain doesn't want to believe you. Like, I want to think that, okay, you're overblowing it. Okay, I know that's not true. I've read a lot of the same stories myself.
Right.
But my natural instinct, and maybe I'm speaking for some people in the audience, I don't want to listen to you. I hear this and I think, like, if she's right, like, we're done. Like, I mean, like just like what a hole we're in. Like, if that's right, like the entire simulation of relationship, to the point where what a real relationship is supposed to do is supposed to force you to become the best version of yourself as you work to compromise and love and give and receive in reciprocal ways with another person, sharing emotions, stories, goods. It's sharing is supposed to cause you to become the best version of yourself. And there's beauty and benefit to conflict and to having to work things out. Like, it makes you into a richer, better person. You don't become the happiest, most fulfilled, best version of yourself, the version of yourself that Christ would want you to be from a Christian perspective, formed in the image of Christ. You're not formed in anybody's image. You're formed in your own image. Like, what you're seeing is a reflection of everything you want, or you're being formed in the image of whoever programmed the AI. Like, you're being formed into something else, even as you are happy, which not even happy.
And
like,
I mean, I know what I just told you is correct, but I don't know all the intricacies about these AI companions. I think you can pick a certain kind of companion. And from what I read, it's even the case that you can pick one that's horrible to you. Although why you would want to do that, I don't know. But, one of the things about the loss of face-to-face relationships is that young people no longer know how to do face-to-face relationships. For example, they have found out that in high school, actually in kindergarten too, but also in high school, students don't look eye to eye at anybody. They find it hard to look eye to eye. And we've seen that, after COVID, they said when the children came back to school, they knew that they would have had academic problems, but they didn't realize they'd have behavioral problems. They could no longer relate to one another. They were always having fights. And we've seen that the whole empathy has gone down, and that's the only reason I can figure out why it is the case that there's all this cyberbullying, where kids gang up on one another and bully one another to the point that there are children who commit suicide because they're being bullied.
Kids are vicious.
And I kind of go, how is that possible? I mean, now, I'm old enough that people always go, well, it wasn't like that. But I don't remember children ever doing that. I mean, maybe they bullied one another a little, but not like this. And I think it's because most of the communication is from a distance, so you don't see the effect of what you're saying on the other person. You don't see the emotional effect. The other thing is that you can do it anonymously. And then when you look on social media, so much of it is people yelling and screaming at one another. I mean, there isn't a lot of...
the worst versions of ourselves.
Yes. So perhaps, and I saw an advertisement aimed at teens to sign up with one of these AI companions, and it showed this girl. And of course I was shocked because it used horrible language in it, but it said, I'm so lonely, sign up with an AI companion. And so, again, this is what concerns me. Okay, so somebody says, oh, well, I'll try it. So you get onto it for the first time, you go, oh, this is kind of neat. Well, the next thing you know, this is taking this kid who killed himself, spent all day, hours and hours talking to this companion.
Wow. Okay, so the breakdown of our brains, the breakdown of our learning, the breakdown of education, the breakdown of our mental health, the breakdown of our relationships. The only frontier left to break and talk about it is the connection to nature itself.
Yes.
What's been the effect of technology there?
Well, the thing is that, again, this is a generation of children who've grown up completely disconnected from nature. Previous generations worked the land, had animals, and so on. The only way that our children now access nature is through the medium of a screen. Mm-hmm. So we see this, so they know nothing about nature, and they don't care either. I had a grandchild who played video games, and he told me a couple of them, and I said, I don't like that. He said, you'd like this one, you get to grow your own vegetables. So, it was Farmville or something. Farmville. So people think they're growing their own vegetables, so they're doing something real, right? Yeah. So we see this because we have children who come on field trips to visit our farm, and the majority of them do not know where food comes from. They think it comes from HEB or somewhere. They don't know how food grows.
Wait, you mean food
they
doesn't?
They really don't. And we had a lady one time with her child, showing her child the horses, and she said, see, when you ride the horses, you shoe the horse, and then you get on the saddle. And we would go, why does she say you shoe the horse first? And then we realized that going riding for her child was a thing that she did on the computer.
And in the video game, you shoe the horse.
Yes.
And interesting.
Yes. So teachers say that if they take children out to a pond or somewhere, the children have no interest because they're used to seeing things on Discovery Channel and something's always happening. Whereas in nature, it's not always happening immediately, so they don't have any interest in that. Sherry Turkle, who's written a lot about the effects of technology, said she took her child on a boat raid in the Mediterranean, and her little girl said to her, look, Mommy, a jellyfish, it looks so real. So, they can't, no longer can't figure out what's real and what's not. And she told this to an executive at Animal World, Disney World, and he said the people who go prefer the robotic animals to the real animals.
They prefer the robot animals.
Because they do more. And we actually knew someone who grew up in Dubai, which is a technology-saturated environment. The first time her young child saw a real dog, she said, wow, how many batteries does that thing take?
That's shocking.
It is. It is. So the thing is that...
how many batteries does that take?
The thing is that, because children are so disconnected from nature, for one thing, it doesn't help them to recognize the wonders of God's creation because, they never really experience it. There is something very different about experiencing someone and watching it. The difference between looking at a picture of an apple and biting into it is different. Eating vegetables that you grew yourself is different,
One involves all your senses. It's a complete integrated experience, and the other is sight and hearing.
Yes.
Okay, so what you've described to me kind of across the board is a falling in love / addiction to the simulation as opposed to reality. Is that a fair way to summarize?
Yes. And I'm not necessarily sure that it's falling in love with. I think...
Dependent upon.
I think it is a habitual way of being. We are now so used to this is the way we are, this is how we live our lives, that we can no longer conceive that there are different ways of living. Do you see what I mean?
Yes, our ability to empathize, our ability to imagine a path other than the deeply worn grooves in our brain through the technology patterns.
The other thing is, one of the things I say about so what can we do about this is that it is essential that you have a group of people, a community of people, a group of people who are committed to the same thing, who are committed to living a different way.
So let's actually, this is a great transition point. We've talked a lot about what the current state of things is, what the impact has been, and we're, if we've listened this far into the interview, I'm sure we're all feeling a feeling of alarm, depression, concern, anxiety, fear. There's probably the emotional tone of the audience is probably the lowest it'll ever be right now. So turn us around, Dr. Toombs. What do we do about this? How do we fight back? How do we move forward?
When I was talking somewhere about education, and I went through the whole crisis, and I said, hundreds of years ago, if you didn't like the messenger, you didn't like the message, you killed the messenger, but we're not doing that, right? Well, I think, first of all, I think recognizing, having a realistic appraisal of what's going on is something that shouldn't necessarily make us depressed. It should make us, galvanize us into saying we have to do something. The other thing is I don't want people to feel like, they feel kind of guilty because they're using all this stuff.
This is
because, like I said, it's a habitual way of being. We haven't been able to recognize that there's an alternative, or to think it's important to have an alternative. Now, the other thing is that we have to say, and we have to acknowledge, the minute you no longer go along with the mainstream, you are considered to be peculiar, or you're considered to be judgmental, or you're considered to be a nutcase, or whatever. Yeah. So it's not necessarily the important thing, the most popular thing to do. And so what about your children? Now, your children are not, if they're in an environment where they use their phones all the time, they are not going to be too happy about deciding that we're going to do things differently. But I do want to encourage you to say that children who get off the technology do not miss the technology.
They're angry at first.
Well, probably. But they have to have something else to do.
Okay.
I mean, which is why it's so important to have a group of youngsters. Now, I read an article by, actually, I think this woman worked for the New York Times, and she had 2 or 3 kids, sons, and decided that she was going to take away their smartphone, and she gave them, a regular phone, but it wasn't connected to the internet. And she told them she wanted them to do that, their smartphones, for a month, and that at the end of the month, they could sell the phone that they had. So they thought that was a good deal. So they got 3 others of their friends to do the same thing. So now they had 6 kids who had no phone. And then so they got used to not having a phone. So not having the internet, so they didn't spend hours on the internet, and they did other things together. And then they went on a camping trip together, and they loved it. They decided that this was a much better way to live because they were having real relationships with one another. They were having fun. They were taking responsibility for doing things.
But it took a team effort to pull that off.
Yes. So it isn't the case that children will necessarily be unhappy when they get over the way of living. Of course, if you have young children, it's a good thing to start this way, But again, I want to say that it's so important to have a group of people who will do it with you, because otherwise you're really kind of cutting yourself off, and that makes it very difficult. Now, Jonathan Haidt has written a lot of information on this. He's very good. But one of the things he says for sure is don't give your child a cell phone until, let me just see what he says. He says, for one thing, do not allow them to be on social media till they are 16. Don't give them a cell phone till a smartphone till they're in high school.
Okay.
And he talks about the importance of community too.
A lot of this is circling back to the same theme: community, face-to-face,
Yes.
authentic,
Yeah.
real,
Yeah.
team. And there's one audience member that specifically wanted to know, is there a way to still engage with social media and live this better way you're talking about?
Right.
Or is it no, one or the other?
No. Well, I think, and I don't want to be in the position of telling anybody what they should do. But I think, number one, it is very important to be very intentional about our use of technology. To really pick what we are going to use, how we're going to use it, when we're going to use it, what we're going to look at. And as far as social media is concerned, I'm not on social media. Most of the people in our community are not on social media. Some are, but they use social media specifically just to share about our way of life and some of the things that they are doing, like helping people to do things. So I think we just have to be aware that there's a lot in social media that is problematic, and we need to think about whether we want to be on social media or not. It is, I can tell you, it is possible to live without being on social media. Yeah. But of course, all your family will go, yeah, but I want to see your pictures. Well, actually, you can still send them your pictures, I think. But so I think the main thing is you have to be very intentional about how you're going to use technology, and particularly very intentional about what you're going to allow your children to do. Why do they have to have a smartphone? Well, we need to get in touch with them. Well, you can get in touch with them on a phone where they can text and phone and take pictures, but they're not online.
That's true.
Yeah. So, and I think it's very important to actively nurture face-to-face relationships. Now, that means that in your home, put the phones away, you see that there are people who are sitting at dinner and their children are on their phones all the time. That's ridiculous. Put your phones away when you come into the house, and don't all sit in different rooms and watch TV in different rooms. Think of activities that you can do together as a family. Think of things you can do together as a group, particularly if you're in a church. There are things that you can do in the community of your church that you can do together. Are there activities that the youth in your church can do together? But the focus has to be on real life experiences. So if it's possible with regard to reintroduce your children to nature.
Okay, yeah.
Let's have a small garden plot or something.
What are the benefits of nature specifically? I've got an anecdote, but I'll share it after. What are the benefits of nature specifically?
Well, number one, the benefit is that there are many benefits. Number one, actually, studies show that interaction with nature has cognitive, emotional, social benefits. Mm-hmm. They use interaction with nature for children who are in treatment for addiction to online engagement, or drug addicted children, and it really does help them. So, but the benefits there are also physical benefits. Obesity in children is a huge problem in the United States.
Yes.
So physical activity outside is good for children. Just being outside, just seeing nature, just recognizing what God has created. I read this thing about beans where if aphids are about to attack the beans, they, through their roots or through something, they put out this substance to alert the other beans because it causes aphids not to attack them. I mean, now if you know things like that, it's a little different than buying a package of frozen beans at H-E-B.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right?
Yeah,
right.
absolutely.
So, and I remember a story that this doctor wrote. She actually lived in Manhattan. She was Jewish. She lived in Manhattan. She was about 3. And she lived in an apartment. Her grandfather gave her a little pot of dirt, and she wasn't allowed to have dirt. And he said, no, you have this, and you put water in it every night, and something wonderful will happen. So she started putting water in it. Nothing happened. She wanted to give it back to her grandpa, and he said, no, you keep putting water in it. And then one day, this little green sprout grew up, and she called her grandfather, and she said, this is wonderful. She said, something wonderful has happened, Grandpa. She said, is it because of the water? And he said, no, it's because of your service, because you were responsible in watering it every day.
Yeah.
So, I mean, if children have to look after animals, or even if they just have to look up something in the garden, it teaches them responsibility. They have to do it every day. You have to water every day.
Steady faithfulness.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes. And then you
delayed gratification.
Yes. And then you have something to show for it. I'll tell you, we teach crafts, and at the fair, we have a Thanksgiving fair. I was teaching these 2 girls how to knit, 17 and 18. They didn't know how to do it. And so they, what are you doing? I said, well, we teach people to knit. Oh, they wanted to do it. So, they struggled and they tried and they knitted a row, I knitted a row. And finally the first one finished, and she went and she looked in the mirror, she put on her headband, she jumped up and down, she said, oh, I did it. And then she took it off, and I said, aren't you going to keep it on? Oh, I'm going to wait till my sister finishes hers. So her sister finished hers. They looked in the mirror, they jumped up and down, they were so happy and took pictures. And then she said, I'm going to show all my friends, and I'm going to go home and knit a scarf next. So it really meant something to them that they had made something themselves. And, crafts is a wonderful way to do things together, to teach a skill, to develop character skills like perseverance, responsibility, taking, listening to instruction and taking pride in what you do. It's not just making this thing.
Resetting our dopamine so we're not so habituated to the quick hits.
Yes.
The anecdote I wanted to share, back to nature real quick, and then I want to turn to the church. You talked about the importance of the church, and so I'd love to talk about the importance of church specifically, but back to nature real fast. There's an organization I got exposed to called, I believe, Elevate Branson in Branson, Missouri. And what they focus on is getting people out of homelessness, out of just poverty, and they do that primarily through providing jobs and job training and connecting people to employment, whatever, all those types of things. But they've realized that in that process, you need to provide a lot more than just classes. Like you've got to provide drug rehabilitation and food and clothes, and there's a lot that comes into helping somebody pull themselves out of poverty. But the reason why I talk about nature is a lot of these families are when the parents are in such impoverished circumstances, that can induce a lot of trauma onto these children of theirs in these family.
Right.
And so when these families come to the center, the parents go to take a computer class or something like that. They've backed up their center, and they've got this really big outdoor play area. Now it's not like a national forest, but it's a big outdoor play area, trees and dirt and all sorts of stuff. There's swing sets, but there's also just a lot of space out there. It's not a chain link fence, 10 by 10s. You go out there, and I said, why do you have this out there? And they told me, whenever I was touring the facility, that we have found, simply put, that nature heals trauma, and that if you can get these kids out into nature or even nature adjacent, and get them off of screens and playing on the tire swing, skinning their knees on the dirt, whatever. Like if you can get them out there, a dramatic reduction in the types of brain pathways that would hinder them from progressing is seen. So, I view nature not just as like the opposite of digital, but as the healer of our digital, or one of the healers of our digital fixation.
Yes, they have showed studies that it helps kids with ADHD too.
I totally believe that.
And it made me think about this thing about elderly people in a nursing home, and this person who was helping them insisted that they put a live plant in everybody's room. And the elderly person, had to take care of this plant. And just taking care of that plant gave them something to care for. And then they had a little garden. Yeah, and then they had a little garden outside, and they were doing stuff like that.
It's beautiful.
And the other thing is, like if you have a small plot, and when our community started, it started in the slums of New York City, and nobody knew how to do anything. But they started out with small plots. But, if you have just a small area in your yard where you grow vegetables, the family can work together. It can be a family project. And so that gives another opportunity for the family to be together.
And a lot of people hearing this, because there's also a housing affordability crisis, a lot of people might be like, well, I'm in an apartment. I don't have a yard, I'm doomed. Well, one, I could say you could probably still do something out on your little patio, but even if you don't have that, the importance of what you're saying of community, band together with other people, somebody somewhere has the yard. And there's community gardens that exist that, so there are, but you're talking about not just community, but intentionality. Like you're not going to find your way out of this compulsive behavior by accident.
Right.
Like, the algorithms, everything, our brain pathways are designed to keep us in this rut.
Yes.
So it's going to take a communal and intentional effort to break out.
And, there are other activities. You don't just have to have a garden. But I was just thinking, maybe you can go and play tennis somewhere or something. The key is to focus on face-to-face, real relationships instead of sitting at home alone with your screen.
Okay.
So
the last piece of kind of fighting back I want to get to is the church. I care a lot about making the church the best it can be because and this is a bigger conversation, but I truly believe, Dr. Toombs, that the rot of our society has its roots ultimately in spiritual rot. The rot of community comes down to us. Why do we prefer the simulation over the real? Like a lot of these are deeply philosophical, spiritual questions. And to heal our society, I really believe the church has to lead the way and lead by example. What is the importance of church in providing healing to some of everything we've been talking about? What is the importance of the church?
Well, I would think, for one thing, it is the perfect place to initiate these discussions, to each one of us to think carefully about how our relationship with technology separates us from the Lord, separates us from one another. One of the commandments is to love your neighbor as yourself. Well, you can't really love your neighbor if you never see your neighbor, if you never have any kind of an interaction with your neighbor, and you can't even love your neighbor if the only way you know them is as a friend on Facebook or somewhere. So it just seems to me that the church is already committed to being a body. And, the scripture about how we care for one another. I mean, if the eye is not a hand, but you need every single one of those people. And so it seems to me it's the perfect environment to develop an alternative culture. That's really what we're talking about,
Yes.
Is an alternative reality, an alternative culture. And so I think that, as a matter of fact, that is the exciting thing, that this is something that the church can lead with. Because you already have the built-in relationships with one another.
Yes.
You already have the commitment to be what the Lord wants you to be. And so how does, one of the things I was thinking to myself was, that's the question we have to ask ourselves. How does my engagement with technology, in whatever form it is, separate me from being whatever the Lord wants me to be?
I try to end every interview with asking, my guest, what are some questions we should be reflecting on? But that right there, I think that's a perfect question to reflect on. What would the Lord have us to become, and how is technology becoming a barrier, a hindrance, a weight, a distraction from that?
Yes, because for one thing, how is it informing me?
Yeah.
When I look at the stuff on the online, how is that informing the way I think? How is it informing my behavior? How is it preventing me from doing the things that I feel the Lord would have me do? How is it separating me in the sense that it's presumably giving me answers to every problem, so I no longer pray to see what it is I'm supposed to do? How much time am I spending on that when I could have been spending time on other things,
Before we end, and by the way, thank you so much for having this discussion with us. It's been very comprehensive, very challenging. But before I end, there's one more audience question that somebody asked that I present to you. And we've covered some of this already.
Okay.
So this is not totally new ground, but I want to make sure I do good service to my audience as well. Have you ever watched The Matrix, that movie by
No.
any? Okay, don't worry about it. But basically, the premise of The Matrix is that people are walking around in reality, and certain characters in the movie are given the choice to discover, like, you can take the blue pill or the red pill. And there's a lot of popular memes and culture built up around this. But the character who is presented with the blue and the red pill is able to take the blue pill, and if you do, everything will stay the same, and you'll never know that anything was different. But if you take the red pill, you will wake up, and you'll realize. But once you wake up, there's no going back. And the character in the movie decides to take the red pill, and he wakes up, and he finds out that he was, and this is kind of ridiculous, but it's a dystopian sci-fi movie, that he's been floating in a pod his whole life. Like everything he thought, his brain was hooked up to machines. Like the simulation had progressed so far that technology had now been hardwired into humanity. And so he'd been floating in a vat basically his whole life. And now the real world was this dystopian landscape, completely devastated, and there's just farms of humans being grown in vats, a crazy scenario.
Right.
But he was now in the real world, and he had and the movie follows the characters who have made that choice to wake up. They are now living in a reality that is infinitely less pleasurable than before. Like the simulation that they were in, they had a job, whatever. But now that they've chosen to break out of the Matrix, and I know again it's kind of out there, but
Right.
now that they've chosen to break out of the Matrix, they have to accept a certain amount of pain and know there is hard work that needs to be done to make our society better.
Right.
Like the actual devastation of our community needs to be addressed by somebody.
Right.
And they had to embrace that. And so I know this is kind of like a long premise, but the person who wanted me to ask a question I'm leading into wanted to know about the Matrix and your thoughts on that. But those characters in the movie, some of them choose to go back. They try to go back into the Matrix because they decide it's not worth it.
Right.
Others have to go on a journey of growing and developing. And what the audience member is wondering is in your opinion, technology, the pull of the Matrix, the simulation, is that robbing us from what Carl Jung would call the individuation process, the process of fully forming into all you can become. Is the matrix, the simulation, the technology, are we losing the ability to become fully human? I know it's like a very big question, and I know it was a long premise, but what are we losing our ability to become fully human?
To the extent that we no longer think about these things, to the extent that we no longer reflect because we're always plugged in, or we're always doing something, to that extent, I think it does rob us of the ability to grow. And, none of us have made it to the point where we don't need to grow anymore. We don't need to ask ourselves, is there a different way that we could live our lives that would make us more fulfilled, that would give us more meaning, more purpose? So I think if we just spend all of our time online or playing video games or checking out social media and looking what other people are saying and being depressed about what's happening, instead of actually engaging in some self-reflection about our lives and how we can improve the lives of other people, how we can improve the lives of our children, then to that extent, I think we are robbing ourselves of the ability to become who the Lord would have us become.
This is a deeply spiritual matter.
Yeah, I think it is. There was a philosophy thing called the brain in the vat, where would you want to be in a vat and you're just plugged into all the pleasure? Similar things. And the answer is, would you want to do that? Well, it's not. It's making you less human.
So we are losing our humanity.
Yes. Yeah.
Let's end this with some calls to action. We've learned about the dangers of technology. We've learned about the threat to our society, to ourselves, to our relationship with the Lord, and we've learned about the pathway out, the re-embracing of the authentic, of community, of face-to-face, and the pushing away of the things that would rob us of our humanity and community and all the things. We've learned about the disconnect of nature and the benefits of replugging into God's creation. And we've learned that it's going to take intentionality and communal effort to pull this off. And so we've also heard reflection questions. The action item for us as a church and as the audience, one would be to buy this book, Changing Our Minds. Two, we have to resolve in ourselves deeply to get a hold of the Lord and ask Him to give us strength to change our minds, to change our orientation. And then if we really believe we're the church, what I'm hearing, Dr. Toombs, is that we have to be the body.
Right.
Somebody somewhere, maybe you, is going to have to reach out to a friend, maybe even over technology, and say, hey, can we agree to both get off this thing together and schedule coffee or tennis or what have you.
Yeah.
Moms and dads, we're going to have to band together and say, hey, us 6, none of our kids are going to have phones, and we all agree that we're going to do this together so our kids can not suffer the consequences of being the only person without. We're going to go have play dates. That at minimum, the intentionality and communal effort the church is going to have to put in if we're not if we're just going to lead the way, which we need to do, but if we're going to be whole and healthy and complete in the Lord ourselves. And then beyond that, another action item that I heard, if I could summarize it, would be the exploration of alternate culture. This goes beyond just simple communal efforts and breaking through the phone. This is looking at alternate ways of education, alternate ways of doing very basic things, your basic routines, like picking up different activities, whether it's crafts or what have you. And maybe it doesn't mean that everybody is homeschooled 24/7, but that could be an option. Maybe there's other sorts of co-ops, and even if you can't wholesale disconnect from mainstream culture, any amount of movement in this direction away from the areas that are harming us would be something I think also that the church needs to consider. And that's kind of my summarization of what I'm hearing. Is that a fair summarization?
Yes, I think that's fair. But the one thing I do want to say is that I think we need to look at this in a certain way. We need to look at this as an opportunity, as something that is worth doing, something that is exciting, that we can actually make a change. You know, I mean, it is very disturbing. And I really do ask people to read the book, mainly because I've got so much research in there, and you can get it on Amazon. But, you know, we look at all this and we go, oh, this is terrible. You know, society is terrible. The world is falling apart. And I actually think it is. But I think we can look at this in a different kind of way. We can say, wow, we really have an opportunity to change.
It's beautiful.
We really, as a church, have an opportunity to lead the way. We have an opportunity to be an example to people, because you know what? When people see that there is a group of people who are committed, that draws other people.
Amen.
And the reason I know that, I can tell you I know that because I know of at least 2 people who came to seminars I gave on this book and who said, I went home and it changed my life. And now actually they're part of our community. But the thing is, I think we need to look at it not as this totally depressing or terrible thing, but as, wow, we have an opportunity to make a difference.
This is not a chore or a browbeating, guilt-based thing. This is a joy that is set before us.
And we have an opportunity to make a better life for our children. You know, our children are our biggest resource. I mean, we have to take care of our children. And so I just think that, you know, sometimes we go, well, how can we best do it? Well, this is one way we can really do it. So I just want to encourage everybody to think of it in that kind of a way.
Absolutely.
So I'm very grateful that you came and we had the conversation.
Thank you so much. As we end, Dr. Toombs has also done extensive work on suffering and the patient caregiver relationship and the effects of different variables, community on the experience of suffering and on that caregiver relationship. We'll have those conversations in the future, and so stay tuned for that. But for this conversation, as we land the plane here, thank you so much for your time, for your attention, and we're super glad you joined in. Please share this with anybody that may want to hear this message, and we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you. Thanks for joining us. If you found this content valuable, please consider supporting us for free by subscribing, sharing, and engaging with us on whatever platform you're most comfortable with. And if you'd like to support us financially, you'll receive premium and early access content. Lastly, please check out all the cool things we're working on by going to reflectiveecclesia.com. Thanks.